ACC staff, for the president's letter?
I mean, that's
take a
kind of
stab.
We
specific.
can certainly do that, just
Yeah.
do another one and kind of put all that in
Let's
there.
take a stab at that, okay.
Okay, well, I'll brainstorm with Jamie and then come up with a
And then,
draft.
so as far as you mentioned, website redesign, so what's the status, of that?
We had a meeting last week, somewhere around there, and so they're working on it, okay? And just in case y'all have received any complaints, Google did some kind of security updates. And as y'all know, a lot of our documents are stored on Google Drive and such. So all of a sudden, a bunch of the links that we had, formatted in, is that the right word? Into the website, they suddenly weren't working. And,
That happened to me.
it did, we started hearing from several people and we were like, what the, but it was because of this security update that they did, I believe it was in first week of September, I believe that's when it was. But we weren't aware of it because, on our side, it looks just fine.
Right.
It's when anybody outside of our organization tries to click their link, or click the links like for a map, all of a sudden the map wasn't accessible. So I think we have found all of those and fixed all of those.
There's about a dozen links or more that were just broken. I think I got them all.
On the one hand, we can say, great, security wise, we were protected, or I can say, dude, Google, let us know. I mean, kinda like, I don't know that with our new website, if our storage will be Google. Don't know that yet.
Oh, so that's up for,
We may wind up being our own host.
okay. Fair enough.
We can work that out.
Now, as far as us doing that, and I know it's still in discussion, but would there be security concerns with moving away from Google and us having everything in-house?
How do I wanna handle this? There's just security concerns anywhere you go. Okay? I am not a techie person, y'all know this, but I do understand some of the big picture things. Quite frankly, I'm not all that impressed with Google security, if you were gonna ask me. I think in some ways, we might be more protected. We've got a pretty rock solid wall, here, and we're working with, obviously, the gentleman from Frankenstein, he's very, very good. I don't know, easy answer there, there's just always gonna be security issues, which is one of the reasons we don't put some things on our website. I mean, residents want it, they can ask it, we'll give it to them, but putting that out there to the world with, and y'all read the same news that I do, how many things have been hacked, how many organizations are hacked, is it really worth putting the district at risk? I'm just not sure. So we try to go right up to that edge, to be as transparent as possible, at the same time we're protecting, the district and private communication with residents, et cetera, so.
Yeah, I know we've had trouble in the past with financial stuff that's in the director's packets being available online, and then people using that to conduct phishing campaigns and,
That's exactly right.
to doing stuff like that, so. I'm glad we take that seriously,
Yeah.
because we need to.
That's usually right at the top of the list, it's the security portion. And just to reiterate a little bit, or to clarify a little bit, it's not so much hosting the documents here, is combining the files that are in the website, or links in the website, instead of having them be external links, they'll be internal.
Okay.
Exactly, I didn't say that right,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, but yeah, talking about security, I mean, today's hits come via Korea and China, so.
And these are public documents that are on our website.
Right.
People are trying to access.
Yes. Well, these hits they're trying to actually get into our system.
Their system.
And then all of a sudden, we'll have 100,000 from Ukraine, and that's what they do everywhere.
100,000 what?
100,000 hits. They're just over and over trying to break
Oh.
that firewall and get in. And that's, you know, once they get in one area, unfortunately, that's when they can take over your entire.
Yeah, if they know the default way to make themselves super users and default passwords aren't changed, your whole system will be open.
That's
You
exactly
gotta
right.
be careful with that stuff.
Yeah, we don't do default passwords.
Yeah, no, you can read books about that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, but the same thing was going on, you know, even like World War II, right? I've read stories from, you know, books from Richard Feynman who said in during the Manhattan Project, you know, there's a ton of safes, right, with stuff locked up, and he found out what some of the default combinations were for the safe makers. Sure enough, several safes, no one changed the default combination, and he was like, I didn't know those things.
And there you
That's what
go.
nuclear scientists do when they're bored. So you have to take that stuff seriously. You gotta change default passwords.
Yeah, and two-factor authentication, if you've never heard of it, it's a really good thing for security. So you know, even on your email, you have two-factor authentication available to you. Yes, multi-factor.
That's the industry term for it.
MFA.
What's the industry term?
Multi-factor authentication. It's like when you log in with a password and then they send you a
Text message with a code.
With a code.
And none of our passwords are password, and we are a little smarter than that, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very difficult to think like a criminal, you know what I mean? It's like, but we've had to, like, what would be our weakest area? You know, with Wi-Fi, with the website, you know, and so we've tried to build kind of our contractor teams, if you will, to help us kind of think along those ways. As an example, our sign company, I mean, hello. They were hacked. They had to pay a ransom to get all of their digital files back. Now, who would want to break into a sign company, you know? But it does happen, and it can be devastating.
Good, glad we take all that seriously. Next item up is attorney's report. You know, I think I glossed over something, so we have a deed restriction thing that I wanted to talk about in executive session, but, let's hear the attorney report first, and then we'll do that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President, Directors, good evening. Just briefly, a couple of things. I received a public information request at my email, which is not a big deal. Obviously, I forwarded it to Suzanne and Jamie, and it got processed as it's supposed to. But, and Jenny and Suzanne will straighten me out on this if I'm not understanding what all we have in place. But it's my recommendation that we come up with a policy and a board resolution that establishes a center point for submitting open records requests to ensure that they're processed timely and to ensure that, you know, we don't run into situations where, you know, I get an email that goes into my spam folder, which is not uncommon, especially from email addresses that I don't have in the firm system already. But to ensure, one, we don't lose track of incoming requests, but also to put people on notice when they are submitting requests where they need to go. And that can be as simple as a link on the district's website. It's probably what I'd recommend.
There's one there.
Yeah, okay, so, it may just, as a meeting, I just need to circle my wagons with Suzanne and Jane, make sure we've got the proper system in place. On top of that, you know, we've had, the requests that we've had come in this year have by and large been from the same folks, and that's all well and good, it's their right to submit. But as you know, the district does incur costs in that process, and so, in addition to establishing, you know, a set process for processing your PIRs, I'd recommend when we come back next month, I bring you a draft resolution, setting up a vexatious requester policy, which is allowed in the Public Information Act. And essentially what that's going to, we may have talked about this in here before, but let's just recap what that does essentially is puts an obligation on the district to process or to keep track of who's requesting what and how much time is being spent on each of those requests. But the upshot is to that policy is that it allows the district to recoup more of their expenses once a certain number of hours have been used in processing those PIRs. So what I'd like to do is come back to y'all next month with at least a draft policy that y'all can review and kick around, and we could revise it as y'all see fit. But that would serve a couple of different purposes that I think will ultimately be beneficial to the district. Keep your expenses down to the extent that we can, and make sure that y'all are not absorbing an disproportionate cost on these PIRs. That's thing one. Thing two, there's, as I'm sure most of you are aware, there's been some litigation pending in one of your adjacent districts that had to do with ACC, deed restriction enforcement and whatnot. The district court issued an order in that case earlier actually, maybe the end of last month or the beginning of this month. Very recently issued an order ruling in the district's favor and basically throwing out the plaintiff's lawsuit on grounds that the court ruled in favor of the district's plea to the jurisdiction, and they did not elaborate on that. That's not uncommon for a district court to not go on great lengths as to why they're issuing a decision. They'll just issue the decision and say that's that. But the plea to the jurisdiction essentially is the district in that case was claiming that the deed restriction enforcement actions are a governmental process, a governmental duty, and the district is essentially exempt from being successfully sued because it enjoys sovereign immunity. So governmental function being carried out by a governmental entity equals sovereign immunities. But when you review the order, you're not going to see all that. You're just going to see the court hereby grants the defendant's plea to the jurisdiction, period. So there's not a whole lot of substance to chew on in those orders. Obviously, the plaintiffs have the right to appeal, and that would go to the Third Circuit, or the Third Court of Appeals, which is basically the central Texas region for Texas State Appellate Courts. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. Obviously, a lot of the issues at play in that lawsuit are similar to some of the complaints that y'all have had here in Fern, Bluff recently. Without patting myself on the back too much, a lot of the pleas and a lot of the findings were exactly what I briefed y'all on previously. My audio. I need my cue to shut up. Anyway, suffice it to say, we'll continue to keep an eye on to see if there is an appeal in that case, and of course we'll brief y'all if that happens. But that's all I've got.
Thanks.
I want to clarify, when you say one of our neighboring districts, are you referring to a mud district?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I have a question on the requester hours. Do you have a limit in mind right now, like 36 hours?
It's established by statute, and I believe, I'll have to go back and look at it, but I believe it's 15 hours in any given month and 30 hours over the course of a year. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the minimum that you can impose. So you can certainly make it more hours if you wish, but it can't be less than that under the statute.
So if someone's requesting a lot of documents, they start December 1st, so it rolls around to the next, November 30th. Once it's December 1st again, clock starts over on their hours, the yearly hours.
Right. And but it's not specific to the individual submitting the PIR, it's the person processing it. So.
Oh, it's not the requester themselves.
Exactly. So it has to do with subject matter and the person actually processing the work. And so that's why I was saying it does create an extra layer of red tape for y'all, because you have to keep track of who's processing what and how much time. You already do that to an extent when you're doing your cost estimates and responding to PIRs, but you've got to keep a more regimented record of what you're spending time-wise and what the issue is, so that you can in turn go back and assess those charges.
So you're talking labor hours, you're talking about labor hours.
Right. Essentially, you're talking about time to review or to locate, review, redact, things of that nature.
And then when it comes time to, I guess you have to give time and cost estimates, and then when it comes time to collect, it's gonna be based on the time, the labor, right? And then the pages, whatever the cost per page is gonna be.
Right, but
For photocopies.
Right, and But the big catch is unlike, responding to your typical PI alert, at some point when you reach that hour threshold, then the district can get closer to recouping actual costs. So there's still limitations on it. It's not, you're not gonna get dollar for dollar all your costs back ever. I'm just gonna tell you right now, it's just not the way the PIA is drafted, but it does get you a little bit closer to being made whole once that time threshold has been met.
Okay, well, I'm in favor of this. I know that, other public entities that have a lot of public information requests in a year, they do this already, and they've been doing it for some time, so it's a very good idea for us to look at this and come up with something reasonable as far as the number of hours.
So I'll bring you just a quick down and dirty memo on the law, what the law is, along with the draft resolution for y'all to review next month, and we can go from there.
Okay, so that's it for the attorney's report part.
Yes, sir.
So let's go back to, deed restriction committee. I did want to go into, closed session for that. Board of Directors is authorized by the Texas Open Meetings Act to convene and close or executive session for certain purposes. These purposes include receiving legal advice from its attorney, Texas Government Code Section 551.071, and that's what I propose to do now. I propose that we go into closed session to discuss residents who retained attorneys and get on deed restrictions and get attorney's advice on that. So at this time, we're going to go into closed session. The time is 6:57. We will, once we're done, we will